Hey YouTube, Joe Walker here at Def Digits Guitar Lessons. Today I have a lesson for my student Andy who couldn't make it. Andy has been working on his B minor chord for a long time, and I've shown him this particular way of playing B minor in the past, but I really want to make a video where it's very clear exactly what's going on and exactly when you should be using this version of B minor, the one I'm going to show you, versus this one that you might already know if you've studied bar chords at all. Usually when you find a chord chart that tells you how to play B minor, it's probably this, with your first finger barring across the strings. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what I generally do when I play B minor in a song, and I'm strumming chords like D and G, and B minor gets thrown in, and maybe C, maybe A, other open chords, and B minor is thrown into the mix in the middle of them. I do not use a bar chord there, and I don't recommend that anyone use a bar chord there unless it's particularly necessary because you're doing something like you can hear exactly what notes are coming out. If you're just strumming, it's fine. It's not even a shortcut. This is a real true B minor chord. So let me show you what it is. So what I'm doing is, if you've ever played an F chord like this with your thumb over the top, muting the outside strings, and you get finger 3, finger 4, finger 2, finger 1. Those are on frets 3, 3, 2, and 1. If you've played F like that, then this will be familiar. We just take that and move it one string higher, that's towards the floor, and one fret higher, that's towards the body. We get this. So what I'm doing there is I've got the two low strings muted, low E strings muted with my thumb. The A string is muted with my third finger right there. My hand is large enough that my thumb can reach all the way around, but when you do this, make sure that you've got the webbing of your hand right there up against, and you're not leaving space like that. Then you're shortchanging your thumb's ability to mute those strings. If you can get both of them, that's great. If you can only get one of those strings, then make sure your thumb is muting the low E string. Then we've got, I'll take it from the reverse so we can do one finger at a time. First finger goes on high E string, 2nd fret. Second finger goes on the B string, 3rd fret, right there. So we got those two notes. Fourth finger goes on the G string, right there, on the G string, 4th fret. So that's diagonally now. Finger 2, finger 3, sorry, fret 2, fret 3 is this one, and fret 4 is this one. Third finger comes in on top of the pinky. Since those two fingers are squashed together, probably your third finger won't come right up against the fret like your pinky does. When you play this chord, make sure your pinky is right against the fret. If you're back a little bit, then that means your third finger is going to be way too far away from the fret, and you'll get that kind of sound. And we want those notes to be clear. So those are the 4 notes we should be hearing. There aren't any open strings, so this is not technically an open chord, but the grip you're using with your thumb over the top like this, and this kind of, I think of it as a baseball bat grip or a crushing an apple grip. If I were to crush an apple, if I were able to do that, I would do it like a fist grip. That's the way we're holding this chord, and that's the way you should generally hold most of your open chords, because your thumb has to do some muting work on some of those chords, especially when you're strumming and you're not just finger picking or picking individual strings. So when we've got this B minor, your thumb is over the top, and the grip feels very much like an open chord. It's not like a bar chord. See what my wrist has to do to go between open chord grip and bar chord grip? My wrist has to come down, and really my whole arm, you can see my shoulder moving. All of that has to move in order to make a bar chord happen there. So if you've got D and B minor back and forth in a song, which is pretty common to see those two chords next to each other, that's a huge movement to make. Even though the notes are right there, you have to get your hand in a posture, get your whole arm into a posture that makes each of those chords possible. And if you're going to strum D and mute those two low strings, or at least one of them, your thumb has to be over the top. And that's a very familiar way for most people to play D. And in order to get that bar chord, your wrist has to go down, and your shoulder may need to drop like mine does to make it comfortable and to make it possible. If you're trying to play the bar chord in this same position, it's not going to work. And if you're having trouble with bar chords, that might be why. It's because your arm is not in a good posture to make the bar chord possible. So let's ditch the bar chord for now. We're not going to throw it in the middle of a bunch of open chords because it's not practical. So this one, your thumb is muting the low E string. Your ring finger can mute the A string. So your ring finger is right there on the 4th fret on the D string. So your ring finger can be muting the A string unless your thumb is large enough to mute both of those strings. I'm muting the A string with both options. My thumb's touching it, and my 3rd finger is touching it. So when we get all of this together, thank you guys. You can go back. Good job. When we get all of this together, we get mute, mute, then we hear the 4th fret, then the 4th fret, 3rd fret, 2nd fret. So now when you strum it, we hear those 4 notes ringing out, and it doesn't sound like an incomplete chord. This really is a complete chord. Technically, we would call it B minor over F sharp, because that note right there is our bass note instead of having the B note as our bass note. But in terms of using it in the context of strumming with other chords, it works 100%. So now we can put it into practice. Like I said before, D and B minor work together quite often. You'll see those quite often. So let's try doing D and B minor back and forth. And on both of these, your thumb needs to be muting at least the low E string. It might mute 2 strings on both of these chords. So if my thumb is just muting the low E string, I get this. And you can just make up a strumming pattern to go back and forth between these 2 chords. Try to make sure that you're getting that clean change between one chord and the next. Anytime you're working on 2 chords back and forth to try to make the less familiar one smoother, what you can look for is places in the shape of your fingers that are common between one chord and the next. So if you look at this shape of the fingers versus this one, clearly the pinky isn't used here at all, but it is hanging out sort of in the spot where it needs to be relative to the ring finger when it goes to B minor. Your first finger, when we go from D to B minor, your first finger is going to stay on the same fret and just move to different strings, to a different string. Goes from the G string here over to B minor. It's on the 1st string now. So your first finger doesn't really have to move laterally. It just moves this way. You just retract it. Now these 2 fingers, fingers 2 and 3, remain in sort of the same orientation when you go from D to B minor. And that's nice to notice because as you're moving from one chord to the next, you want to keep them in that orientation. See, the 2nd finger is diagonally back 1 string, 1 string higher, 1 fret lower than the 3rd finger. And when you move to B minor, it's still diagonally back there from the 3rd finger. Now it is 2 strings higher, but still just 1 fret lower. So it's almost in the same orientation, fingers 2 and 3. So as you move from one chord to the next, keep those 2 fingers in that same orientation. Let's look at another pair of chords, G and B minor. Thank you, Miles. Please go back. G and B minor. Again, you can just make up a strumming pattern. For ways to make those 2 chords really, really smooth from the G into the B minor. So looking at the G, there's one spot where we have 2 fingers, these 2. If you play your G this way, I know there are many different ways to play it. If you play it this way, we've got these 2 fingers, finger 1 and 2, are going to stay in exactly that same orientation and go all the way down to the high 2 strings. They're here on the low 2 strings for G, and they're going to stay in that orientation just like they're flying in formation, and land here on the high 2 strings while fingers 3 and 4 are moving at the same time. So as you do this from one chord to the other, try to make sure all of your fingers are moving and they're hovering over the strings in the shape that you want them to be in for the new chord, and then they all plop down at once. G and B minor. We can also do A and B minor. I play my A like this. If your finger is big enough to go flat across those three strings, then that's usually what I recommend. Some people will play A with 3 fingers. Whatever way you play A, just look for things that you can do to make that change efficient between A and B minor. We could also do E minor and B minor. We could also maybe do F sharp major and B minor. Now this change is nice because the shape that you just learned for B minor, just move all of those fingers 1 string lower. Now you're on the middle 4 strings. You mute the low E string and mute the high E string, and you've got those notes in the middle, and then you move them to 1 string higher to get to B minor. So those are several different ways that you might work on changing between common chords that are commonly seen next to each other: B minor and D, B minor and G, B minor and A, B minor and E minor, B minor and F sharp major. But whenever you're working on a song that has B minor thrown in the middle of a bunch of other chords, just take the chord that happens right before B minor and work on going back and forth between those two. So if you're doing something like this, that was G into B minor. And if all the other chords are open chords and they all feel comfortable, then don't continue working on those if you need to isolate that B minor. Just work on that G and B minor back and forth. Make sure your fingers are all moving at the same time and they're hovering over the new chord, and then they all plop down at the same time. That's it for today. Have fun. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.